The Colossi. The year was 2025, and Earth had never felt so small. It started with a low hum. At first, people thought it was some sort of atmospheric disturbance. The hum vibrated through cities and countryside alike, rattling buildings, shaking the ground, and sending animals into a frenzy. The sound was everywhere, yet there was no source. Then the sky darkened, not with clouds, but with something else, something huge. They were first spotted in the Pacific, rising from the ocean like mountains. Their massive forms blocked out the sun. These weren't ships. They were alive. The Colossi. Hakiskus at nearly a mile tall, the creatures towered over the Earth's largest skyscrapers. Their bodies were a strange, dark hue, as though made from a mix of flesh and stone. Their movements were slow but deliberate, with legs as thick as city blocks, smashing into the Earth's crust as they walked. They didn't seem to notice the world beneath them, or perhaps they didn't care. They marched across continents with horrifying indifference, crushing entire cities underfoot. The first one came ashore near Tokyo. Within minutes, the city was in ruins. Buildings collapsed like sandcastles as its massive limbs tore through streets and homes. Those who tried to flee were caught in the chaos, hundreds, then thousands, crushed beneath its weight, and still the creature lumbered forward as though drawn by some unknown force. The world's military powers acted quickly, but nothing could stop them. Fighter jets launched missiles at their heads, but the explosions barely left a mark. Bombs dropped from the sky only seemed to irritate them, causing them to swing their colossal arms, sweeping entire aircraft out of the sky like flies. Tanks and artillery fired endlessly, but their skin, or whatever it was, proved impenetrable. By the time the second Colossus emerged, this time in the Atlantic, the world was in a panic. Governments declared martial law, telling people to evacuate cities. But where could they go? The creatures were too big, too powerful. The only thing anyone could do was run, and even that seemed futile. Evelyn Parker watched it all unfold from the safety of her apartment in New York City, glued to the news feeds like everyone else. She had heard the hum for days, felt the subtle tremors underfoot, but it wasn't until the Colossus was spotted off the coast of New Jersey that true fear set in. "We're evacuating Manhattan," a voice on the TV said, but it was too late. From her window, Evelyn saw it, the dark silhouette emerging from the water. Its head alone was larger than the Statue of Liberty, and its limbs stretched out like a grotesque spider, its legs sinking into the earth as it moved. The air was filled with the sound of screaming sirens, car alarms, and the deafening thud of its footsteps. She grabbed her bag, sprinting out of the building with the rest of the fleeing crowds. But it didn't matter how fast they ran. The Colossus entered the city, indifferent to the chaos below. Its massive hand reached down, scooping up a chunk of the skyline as if it were digging through dirt. Skyscrapers crumbled in its grasp, the buildings and people inside disappearing into the creature's palm. Evelyn stumbled, trying to make it across a bridge packed with desperate people. But then a shadow loomed overhead. She looked up just in time to see the massive limb of the Colossus descending. It was like a mountain falling from the sky, and there was no escaping it. The screams around her intensified as the creature's hand crashed down onto the bridge, smashing cars, bodies, and concrete alike. The impact sent a shockwave through the air, flinging Evelyn off her feet and into the freezing waters of the Hudson River below. She hit the surface hard, her lungs burning as she fought her way back to the surface, gasping for air. All around her, debris from the destroyed bridge rained down into the water. People who had been trapped on the bridge moments ago were now flailing in the river, screaming for help. But Evelyn knew that help wasn't coming. No one could save them now. The Colossus continued its march, oblivious to the devastation it left behind. It stepped into the city, its enormous foot crushing entire blocks, sending shock waves that made the ground tremble miles away. Above the carnage, helicopters hovered, capturing footage for the world to see, the footage of humanity's doom. Evelyn swam to the shore, pulling herself onto the rocky bank with shaking arms. She coughed violently, her body aching from the fall. But when she looked up, all she could see was destruction. Half of Manhattan was gone, reduced to rubble under the Colossus's feet. Fires raged where buildings once stood, and the sky was thick with smoke and ash. In the distance, she could see military jets circling the creature, firing missiles in vain. The explosions lit up the sky, but did little more than irritate the giant. One of the jets flew too close, and with a casual swipe, the Colossus batted it out of the air. The flaming wreckage spiraled down into the city, adding to the chaos below. Evelyn's hands shook as she watched, her mind struggling to process the sheer scale of what was happening. It wasn't just New York. Similar reports were coming in from all over the world. Colossi had risen from the oceans in Europe, South America, Australia. They were everywhere, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them. As the hours passed, the death toll skyrocketed. Cities that had stood for centuries were wiped off the map in minutes. Attempts at communication with the creatures were futile. If they were intelligent, they showed no interest in humanity's pleas. They were like forces of nature, ancient and unstoppable, tearing through the world with no purpose other than their relentless march. By nightfall, the world was in ruins. Evelyn found shelter in the basement of a crumbling building, her phone flickering with the last bits of battery. She scrolled through news updates, watching the final broadcasts from around the world. Governments had collapsed and mass evacuations had turned into frantic stampedes. Refugees fled inland, but it was only a matter of time before the Colossi found them too. There was one final transmission from the global scientific community. After analyzing data from the creature's behavior and origins, they had a theory. The Colossi weren't invaders, they weren't even from space. They had always been here, buried deep beneath the Earth's oceans, lying dormant for eons. The hum that had signaled their arrival was the sound of their awakening. The Earth was theirs. Humanity had simply been living on borrowed time. Evelyn stared at the screen, numb. She could hear the distant booms of the Colossus moving through the city above her, each step closer than the last. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the sounds, the screams, the chaos. In the end, there would be no heroes, no last-minute salvation. This was the end of humanity's reign. The Colossi had come to reclaim their world, and nothing would be left in their wake but silence.